What's up, my friends? We are kind of in Matthew 21, but really in the Old Testament, in the book of Hosea and 2 Kings, looking at a whole bunch of stories that led to really one of the darkest chapters in all of the Old Testament. Murderous, violent, corrupt, a losing war, the end of a nation, questions about whether God will keep his promises. I mean, really dark stuff. And I think that this little remark, this little living metaphor of Jesus that's recorded in Matthew chapter 21 would have conjured all of that for the original audience. So here's what we're looking at. Matthew 21:18. Early in the morning, as Jesus was on his way back to Jerusalem, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. And then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." And immediately the tree withered. We've been in Hosea looking at this humanly ill-advised union between the prophet and the prostitute that he took as a wife and had kids with. All of those kids are going to end up having bizarre names that point to God's judgment against the northern nation of Israel, against his own chosen people. We've been back in 2 Kings looking at a horribly violent, ugly, vile moment in the narrative of the Bible, and we're trying to connect the dots between what was going on back there and the imagery employed in Matthew chapter 21. We've been talking about this for a couple days now, so if you haven't caught those, you might want to go get them. If you are caught up, well, let's get cracking. In verse 6, it goes on, Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. And you're like, oh, no more kids. You two need to stop with the sexing, because every time you do, some new horrible thing gets said. Then the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer show love to the house of Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to the house of Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but by the Lord their God. After she'd weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, call him Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people. They will be called sons of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will be reunited, and they will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Look, this stuff is all brutal. Every last bit of it is difficult going down. It's difficult language from a difficult time long ago, but you can span the years and interpret what's going on here, I think, as easily as I can. We got a living metaphor that is meant to demonstrate how God feels about the way the relationship has gone between him and the northern expression of his chosen people. He's pointing to a time where the thing fully and finally jumped the rails. He's saying, you did even more evil to get rid of horrible evil that was already going on. And at this point, the whole thing is such a giant, tangled up evil mess that we are going to bring about judgment, and your nation is done. God is removing himself from the deal, at least to some extent, with the northern kingdom, and saying effectively, I'm going to let Assyria have their way with you. Now, what is very important to note is that as we thumb through the book of Hosea, the story unfolds not with that being the final word. The story unfolds with God having Hosea go off and buy with his own money his wife back out of voluntary sex slavery that she has pursued because she can't shake off her old ways. Hosea keeps on doing that, banging his head against the wall, and somehow redemption comes out of it. And when we get all the way to the end of Hosea, there is no removing of the judgment of what's going to happen at the hands of Assyria. And that does happen in 722, just a few decades after the people Hosea is writing to imagine themselves to be completely unassailable and completely enlightened and more moral and more right than anyone who had ever come before them. Those idiots before didn't get it. They were superstitious and naive and couldn't imagine how enlightened we are now. They thought they were the best thing that had ever happened to the smartest people ever, and they got utterly crushed. But chapter 14 tells the story of God's restoration, of God putting things back together, pointing toward this Messiah thing. All of these conversations about Hosea and this living metaphor to say that in Matthew 21, when Jesus walks up to this fig tree on his way to Jerusalem, where the temple is, and he sees that it is producing nothing, and he curses it, and it withers, it would have been profoundly evocative of the horrible events that prompted and led up to the story of Hosea and the judgment of the northern kingdom, they would have known that that's scary. We remember what happened to all of those northern tribes. It was a blowout. It was bad. They're gone, erased from history. The remnant only lingers through a few of those people and the minority of the remaining tribes that came out of Judah and the house of David. God's judgment is real, and the original audience would have caught that this is a profound rebuke, a profound image of judgment miraculously confirmed against his own people, or at the very least, and I think we'll explore this more tomorrow, against the temple leadership, the religious leadership, maybe not all of Israel like it was in Hosea, but certainly against the enemies of Jesus who are putting an obstacle between the kingdom and the people they're theoretically supposed to be serving. This indictment would conjure the difficult lessons of ages past. This indictment would conjure the cultural memory of what it was like to be on the opposite side of the conversation from God. And this indictment would be a portent, a warning about mistakes that were in the process of being made. There's still time to turn away from this stuff. But this indictment, this weird little fig tree anecdote here, is also going to conjure the memory of God's grace and the promise that despite the violations against him and the pure, wild, unchecked evil that was going on that prompted this judgment, that still his heart was soft, that still there is this promise of restoration that lingers even at the end of such a horrible affair as the stuff that we've been looking at that happened with Jehu and Ahab and Jezebel and all of the stuff going on in the northern kingdom that prompted the events and the judgment described in the book of Hosea to occur. I think this is a living metaphor that for a modern audience is like, oh, I think it's maybe like the religious leaders or like the tree and they're not doing any good. So Jesus cursed it. And then, okay, let's get on to the next thing. And I think it's fine to read it that way. I mean, that's pretty good. That's the gist. What I'm trying to do with these episodes where we've dipped back into the Old Testament is to say there was a lot more weight behind this for the original audience. And this would have been much more foreboding, even though these remarks are only a few sentences long. If we get that, we are better positioned to understand the parameters of this confusing promise about belief and prayer and God doing things that we're going to look at next time around that come at the end of this little anecdote in Matthew chapter 21. Was that a lot? I feel like that was a lot. Hopefully it was very, very fruitful, and we'll get back to lighter material like the hero of the story marching toward his brutal murderous execution. I don't know that I can actually promise that it's going to get much brighter in the short term. Oh, well, hey, we're in it together. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.